to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Chinese police stations in the West and President Biden's promise to veto tariffs on solar panels entering the country. These issues are two of the most trending topics related to China right now. We spoke to Salih Hudayar, Prime Minister of East Turkestan government in exile, about his personal experience with transnational repression and how he views human rights and climate arguments related to President Biden's decision. To clarify, East Turkestan is the name the Uyghur ethnic group uses for its homeland. In China, the same area is known as Xinjiang. Prime Minister Salih Hudayar, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me back.
Recently, there's been a lot of news about these overseas Chinese police stations operating in the U.S. One in New York was shut down, but one of the concerns around it is transnational repression. So in terms of that, do you have any examples of that in practice?
So in my own experience, before, as soon as I started publicly, advocating for East Turkestan and its people, advocating for the recognition of the Uyghur genocide, I've started receiving, a lot of anonymous, initial threats on social media. Then it turned into phone calls and even letters. Then it even turned into some Uyghurs who later upon we realized had, connections to CCP and PRC entities, threatening me in person or trying to buy me off. And once that failed, then they tried to, even weaponize the U.S. justice system by, making false complaints stating, that I threatened them or these things, stuff like that in order to, stop my activism and to, character assassination. Luckily, they failed, and the U.S. government, soon realized that this was a game. So there's instances like that. Even with the Falun Gong, what's most common is the fact that, they're constantly harassed by Chinese, operatives here in the United States, or, they'll receive, threatening calls or calls from, their family members, crying and telling them to stop what they're doing, because this is how the Chinese government, the CCP, operates, by holding your own family members captive and using them against you to try to silence you.
Zooming in on, say, U.S.-China relations, it seems recently the U.S. House of Representatives wanted to restore some tariffs on solar panel imports. These are coming from Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. But those facilities are owned by China, and they account for 80% of the imports of solar panels into the U.S. And in terms of that, it seems there's a lot of concerns with human rights and slave labor, since most of this comes from Xinjiang or East Turkestan. What do you know about that?
Well, so starting in 2014, when China rolled out its concentration camps, solar polysilicon production or solar panel production in East Turkestan, amounted for not even 9% of global, production. By 2019, it went over to over 50%. And I think as of 2022, it's somewhere around 60%. So there's no doubt that the solar panels that are being manufactured in China or by Chinese factories that are being manufactured in third countries to evade, for example, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, is being tainted by, components that are made with forced labor. And this is something that needs to be pushed back against. We welcome the U.S. Senate. It was actually the U.S. Senate's committee who passed this legislation to impose tariffs. I think it needs to be beyond tariffs. I think we need to ban all, solar panel products that are made in China or made in, other countries by Chinese companies, or less will be, complicit in, the forced labor of Uyghur, Falun Gong, and other peoples.
And Prime Minister, as you mentioned, right, one of this is a way of getting around that forced Uyghur prevention law that is law in the U.S. Instead, you're seeing, I think, still forced labor-made solar panels, but ending up in these other countries that then make their way into the U.S. And in terms of these tariffs being waived from these countries, President Biden said he will veto it if it gets to his desk. What are your comments on that?
Well, I mean, if President Biden is going to, from my understanding, what they're trying to do is waive the tariffs on these solar panels. I think, as I stated, they need to completely ban all solar panels that are made from, made either directly in China or outside of China by Chinese-owned companies. President Biden needs to be more tough on China, as he promised, from the beginning. He promised to uphold human rights, and he needs to act upon his promises.
And on that note, it seems in terms of just solar panels themselves, the whole argument there is, the U.S. needs them to fulfill its goals of renewable energy and meet all these different goals in terms of climate change. What is your comment on that?
Well, it's not going to be beneficial to the United States or any country if they are, we're talking about, we want to engage in climate change cooperation with China. How can you cooperate with a country that's engaging in genocide, that's engaging in mass human rights violations, atrocities across the board against all of its people, let alone the people of East Turkestan or Tibet or the Falun Gong? So these are completely unacceptable, I think, and I think that the United States government needs to make it clear that, we're not going to cooperate with you on anything unless you address these issues first. Human rights should be a priority, or else how are we going to benefit from the solar panels that are made with slave labor when, if anything, will have been contributing to that slave labor? Let's switch the roles around for a second. Hypothetically, would we as Americans, would we as Americans, if we are Americans being forced to, to make these slave labor products, to make these solar panels, would we be happy if some country across the world was, saying, we're going to be tough on human rights, but, we're going to continue and accept this slave labor that was produced by American slave labor? A solar panel that was produced by American slave labor, even though we claim to be tough on human rights.
Prime Minister, with all the areas covered today, any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I think these are all issues, especially the issue of, Chinese transnational repression. This needs to be dealt with, swiftly. We can't continue to delay and let the Chinese government, undermine. Essentially, they're undermining the United States sovereignty by, attacking, engaging in transnational repression against American citizens, against American, residents. So this is totally unacceptable, and I think the United States needs to make that clear. I think they need to make it very clear, by following Canada's recent example, by, expelling some Chinese diplomats that have direct connections to these cases.
As you said, actions speak louder than words. And Prime Minister Saleh Hudayar, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for today's China in